Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. This is John Bishop with John Bishop Fine Art, and this podcast is called Conversations for Freelance Creatives. The whole purpose of this podcast is to actually have a conversation with creatives from all kinds of fields and all levels of their career and talk about the issues, the concerns, the joys of running a small creative business. And that's what we're trying to do. This is episode number 6. We're going to talk today about risk management. We've talked in the past episode about taking risks and the importance of taking risks, and how important that is to running any small business, but in particular, an artistic business. And what I've noticed is that a lot of the problems that I'm feeling, I keep hearing repeated in lots of people around the studios and other friends, other platforms that have creatives, is we all seem to be struggling with the same kinds of issues. Now that shouldn't surprise me, and it doesn't. But I do think that there's not a lot of conversation. It's as though, on one hand, there's a feeling that if you are a small business person, if you are involved in business, you should already know these things. And so people don't kind of like to admit that they're actually struggling with things or just want to have conversations. And the other part is that as an artist, people feel like they're not business people. And so they feel as though it's somehow disingenuous to talk about business concerns and sales and marketing, when all they really should be talking about is creating good art. And I think that's marvelous. You want to create good art, please do. But I also think that the inability to have these conversations kind of perpetuates this cycle of confusion, of self-doubt, and sometimes in just running pretty crappy little businesses. And I think that is something that conversations like this can actually help. I think one of the problems that we all face is just how do we make enough money freelancing so that we can support ourselves to do the kinds of creative endeavors that we so love. So today, what we're going to be talking about is how to take those risks that we've already identified and how we can start to manage some of that risk and whether or not we should. Really, risk can be broken into 3 categories. There's, first of all, the perception of risk, right? Because we have to be able to recognize risk when it's there. If we don't even see the risks, then we're not able to do anything with them, and it's actually fairly dangerous, I would think. So the first part is actually identifying and perceiving that there are risks. And once you've perceived a risk, then the next step is to create some sort of assessment of that risk. How important is it? How big of a risk are we talking about? I think I gave the example of I have a rug upstairs, a runner that I bought on holiday in Tunisia. I love the rug. It's very, very pretty. And there's this long hallway at the top of the stairs that it fits beautifully in. It looks really good. I love the rug. But every time I walk down the hall, it's a rug on a carpet. So I kind of catch my foot under the edge of the carpet, and the cat loves to do the same. So it occurs to me as I walk that I could actually trip on that carpet. And the way the carpet is placed, if I were to trip, could I not hit that railing and go over the rail and fall to my death at the bottom of the stairs? Now, the risk of that happening is so small. Is it a risk? Yeah, I suppose it is. I've never tripped before. I've never even stumbled. I do catch my foot there, and I have to move my foot back to fold the carpet back down. But the assessment of that risk is that it's not significant enough for me to warrant any kind of response over time. We talk about driving cars. It's very, very risky to drive a car, but I would much rather drive to work and control the car and drive myself to work than I would to take a plane. I feel like there's more risk involved in a plane when we know statistically that it's much safer to fly in a plane than to drive in a car. So evaluating those risks and how important they are is as significant as recognizing them in the first place. And then lastly is the kind of mitigation. How do you manage the risks that are deemed to be significant? And that creates, back to what we've been talking about all this season, is planning. How do you create a risk management plan that makes sense for a small art business? And that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, the other thing to remember is that all risks are not bad. In fact, obviously some are bad. Many risks are opportunities. They're actually good. If you didn't take those risks, you would never move forward. Can you imagine running a business with no opportunities? So not all risk is bad. Many risks actually can be good. And there are other risks that make no difference and have no impact at all. Now, if I am a small business person, it's incumbent upon me to figure out what those risks are to my business to the best of my ability. I mean, there's a whole question of a scale here, right? Because when I was working in New Zealand, there was a city hall, a city government building, that there was a small fire. Not a big deal. It was quickly put out. There was no real damage, but there was some smoke and there was some heat. And what happened was, when the alarm went off, people were told, get up, leave the building. They got up, they left the building. And when that fire was put out, the heat that it created released a very, very toxic fume from the paneling inside the building. And that was not going away. And so no one could go back into the building until hazmat people came out in their spacesuits and actually took down all the old paneling and replaced it to make it safe for people to go in again. The problem was that when everyone got up and left, they followed the instructions and they left their cell phones, they left their coats, they left their car keys, they left their computers on, they left their phone systems, and this was before everything was on the cloud. And no one could go home, no one could get back in the building, no one could answer the phones, no one could put out a notice online that in fact there was a problem, and when people were trying to contact them, they couldn't change the website, couldn't update that because the servers were in there. They were out of that building for over 2 weeks. They couldn't pay anyone because all of payroll was inside that one building. Now, they did not perceive that risk. No one knew that that paneling was somehow deficient and such. But what that sparked is that story created enough of a stir among other governmental agencies around the country that all of the cities had to create a risk management plan for that kind of eventuality. What would happen if your main center closed down? For me to do that in my small business would be ridiculous, right? I don't move in those kinds of circles. That for me to create some silly big report, who would read it? It's just not a significant response to the way I run my business. I'm too small. But the idea is the same. How do you create a plan to address the risks that you identify in your business without just working the plan? You're spending all your time on the actual plan. What we do is we create a list. As we identify risks, we jot them down. We don't spend a lot of time on them unless they're truly significant. But we do create a list, and then when it comes time for our annual budget budget planning and goal setting, we review that list and figure out do we need to feather any kind of response or address these risks in any way. That way we are spending some time working on it, but we're not just sitting and catastrophizing over what the possible nightmare scenarios could be. That works fairly well for us, but I do want to emphasize that there are times when you have to respond more quickly. There are risks that could come up in the studio. There could be risks that come up when you're out on location, and those might need immediate response. You have to be sensitive to that. One of the problems I see with a lot of creatives that I know is that we are truly small businesses. We don't have a lot of overhead. We don't have a lot of money to invest. And so we're also not very well versed in business. And so what I think a lot of people do is they're afraid of being taken advantage of, because there are lots of solutions out there to lots of problems that we can't afford. I mean, I remember when I was looking for a CRM, kind of a customer management system, and subscriptions to those kinds of services were $2,000-$3,000 a year. And I was like, but I'm only managing a handful of people comparatively. It didn't make sense, and that was ridiculous, and I wasted a lot of time. Luckily, I didn't waste a lot of money. However, I did waste a lot of money on a large marketing database that gave me addresses of people, and that was really interesting. I worked with that for 2 or 3 years, spending around $1,200 a year. And it was fascinating, and it did not generate a single sale for me. Now, the people at the company blamed me for that. I'm obviously not a very good marketer. That's probably true. I don't doubt that. But the fact was, I was dealing at a level that I had no business dealing. I could have done the same thing and do the same thing now with a spreadsheet that I did with a $1,200 subscription. And so when I look at some of the risks that I face, I think, and it goes back to that whole question of the airplane, there are certain issues that are just about control. They're frightening to us. They're considered to be risky because we can't control them. And so we have to look at those kinds of things that we can control. If I look at my studio, if there's a problem in my studio, if I have a rug that I deem is a risk of someone tripping in my studio, I can do several things. I can roll up that rug and get rid of it. I can close the door and close the studio if there's something going on that I deem risky. I have control over that environment. And then there are the things that I don't have any control over, that are completely outside my sphere of control. An asteroid could hit the planet and destroy us. I could have a heart attack. I suppose I could control that if I ate better. But things that you just don't really have any control over, and you can't spend a lot of time stressing over those things. You might kind of hedge against them if you have some sort of knowledge of how you might address them, and we'll talk about that. And lastly, there are the things that you can't control, but that you can influence. And those are the things where a plan becomes vital. The things I can control, I can deal with. The things that I can't control, I can't deal with, but I can be aware. But the things that I can't control, but I can influence, is where I need to spend most of my time in risk management. If I can create a plan that says, for example, we know that we're not getting the kind of response that we want, the kind of sales we want in our studio just opening on second Saturdays and third Saturdays. The traffic used to be better, people used to buy more, it kind of dropped off, and then COVID. And that's been devastating for us ever since. Things are starting to pick up again a little bit, but at the same time, we're not paying our rent with that money. most of our income comes from photography and video production. The art sales are just not doing it. We then said, okay, we need to make more money. We will sell online. So we've spent probably the last year just flooding some online platforms with art, hearing from others that they were selling online. We are not selling online. It's just not happening yet. We are still putting it out there. We sell occasionally, but we're not making enough off of that either. The beauty of that kind of income, though, is residual income. I can be selling in the middle of the night while I'm asleep. So that's not solving the problem either. So what we want to do is we want to create, we can't control who comes into the studio. We can't make people show up. We can make it more attractive. We can decorate it beautifully. We can hire exotic dancers to dance by the front doors. We can lure people in, but we can't control whether or not they will come in. But we can influence them. And so what we're doing now is we're saying, okay, I'm not going to be able to influence the general public. I mean, I can put out ads, I can put out a billboard, I could fly a plane with a banner, but I can't make people come in. However, I do have a list of people who are my supporters, people who have bought my art in the past, and people who have shown interest in my art, and who are on my mailing lists and things like that. The thought here is I can start to have events that are invitation only and invite only those people that I know are likely to attend and create a lovely experience for those people. Now what I've done is I can't still guarantee that they're going to show up, but I can influence them greatly to show up. I can send them a lovely invitation. I can call them on the phone if I have their number. I can send them emails. I can have a really good event with lovely food and entertainment and make it to where they'll certainly want to come the next time. And that's what we're trying to do now. So we've got a risk that no one's going to come in and buy. We're paying rent for a studio that not enough people are visiting. We're trying to say, okay, what can we control and how can we mitigate this risk that no one's going to show up? Well, we're going to try and bring people in specifically, invitationally, for particular events. That's one way we're trying to manage one of the risks that we've identified. The other thing is, you have to judge how much risk you can afford, right? Because there are things that I can do. I can play the lotto. I mean, there are basically two kinds of risks. There's a pure risk, which is a risk that is always bad no matter what. A fire. Nothing good comes from a fire unless you're having a fire sale. Fires are always bad. Burglaries are always bad, right? They are pure risks. And you just have to mitigate that as best you can. Now, how do you mitigate the effects of a pure risk? Well, in the case of fire, you get insurance, right? Or fire extinguishers. And in case of a burglar, you get a security system, cameras and alarms. So there are ways you can try and address those pure risks that are always bad. But then there are lots of risks, as we mentioned before, that are actually opportunities, right? And so you say, well, this is a bit risky, but if it works, I'm good. So you try and get that dream client. You try and capture that dream collector. Because if it does work, then you could stand to make money or build a relationship over a long period of time. And so there are risks you take, right? You take a risk writing a letter. You take the risk showing up or sending an invitation or I'm trying to think of another example that is not just about inviting people. But there are risks like, well, for example, we go out and do photography. We do a lot of photography for real estate. So we have new homes, model homes that people pay us to go out and photograph so that they can list them online to sell them. And we have some very, very long-term customers, and we enjoy working with them quite a bit. So we were out at a new home. Bogdan's tripod gave, and the camera hit the wall, and the lens took a gouge out of the newly prepared sheetrock wall that was ready for sale. And we have insurance, and so we contacted them, and they were really cool about it because they know us and because we didn't try and hide it. But that kind of risk was managed. We could relax because we knew we had insurance. It could have been a ding for us. Obviously, your rates may go up, but we knew that this risk was something we could handle. The other part of that risk, though, was the camera. The camera lens is worth much more than the camera itself. And for that lens to hit the wall, knocked out all the little electronic and mechanical controls inside, and it messed up the lens. Now, had we not had a second lens, we couldn't have even finished that job that day. Now, luckily, one of the ways we deal with risks is we always have a second lens and a second camera, because it's equipment, right? Things go wrong. So one of the risks that we had to take was, if we go out and we only have one good, expensive lens, and we lose that lens, we can no longer run that business until we get another lens. And we can't necessarily afford to go out and grab another lens. It could be $7,000, $8,000 for a lens. The risk that we were willing to take, and of course our insurance would have covered that as well, I believe. As it turns out, we sent in the lens, they repaired it. We had a second lens so we could finish the job. We told them, they didn't freak out. We didn't get charged for the wall. But that could have gone in a very different direction. You have to know how much risk you can stand before you're actually just being foolhardy, right? I can go and buy a lotto ticket. My chances of winning are infinitesimally small. But I can afford a couple of bucks on a lotto ticket. Because if I do win, my life has changed forever, right? So I can handle that level of risk. To throw all my money and all my attention into something that if I don't succeed, I'm destroyed, that becomes a bit foolhardy. And that's why when we were talking about entrepreneurship a couple of weeks ago, and how one of the defining factors of an entrepreneur is that person's ability to take and manage risk. That's where it really starts, the tire hits the road. You must be able to take risks, but you must be able to manage those risks. You can't just throw it all away. Then you're done. And so you need to be able to identify when you're assessing how risky a risk is, you need to be able to make those kinds of decisions. And sometimes that may mean walking away. I mean, we had a contract with a big skyscraper in town, downtown Houston. And when we were doing the contract, this fellow, we were going to be there for 2 hours, one day, supervised. And all we were taking was 2 lights and a camera, 3 tripods. And they wanted us to get an additional $5 million in insurance. Now, granted, light could blow up, hurt somebody, catch an art on fire, I suppose. But we were using LED lights, so not really. But we looked at them and we said, I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to do this. We can't manage that amount of risk. Then they just waived it. And we went with the insurance we already have, which I think is $2 million. And the only reason we have insurance to that level is because a lot of people require, before they'll let you in their building to do photography, they require that you have a certain level of insurance. So I think we're a little bit overinsured, frankly. So we want to be realistic about risk. We want never to be foolhardy, but we also want never to catastrophize, right? The whole worry about me falling down the stairs over a carpet and over a rail that's catastrophizing, right? That's not going to happen. We can't function if we're going to paralyze ourselves with fear over worrying about incredibly remote risks or worrying that and taking them too far, right? I had the lens hit the wall at the new home. I could have been sued by the company for more money than I have. I did not catastrophize. I knew these people. I've worked with them over time. I have insurance and I was responsible when the accident occurred. And it was all fine. It could have gone different, but it didn't. There was no reason to believe that a catastrophe was about to happen. And I see people who get a little frozen with fear because they're just not comfortable being out there on the edge, out there on a limb. So you need to be able to control what you can control, influence what you can't control but have influence over. And if it's completely out of your scope, let it go. Just let it go. The other thing to remember is that risks are not all financial. A very, very important part of business today is how you are perceived. Your reputation, right? One of the problems I have with Google and all these Google, where you leave recommendations and you leave comments and rate, give a certain amount of stars to people, these little online reviews, they're really helpful. I look at them as a consumer before I buy something, before I go someplace, before I book an Airbnb. I do look at the comments. But realize how a small negative comment can affect your livelihood. We had an example of a friend of ours, older guy, and he is incredibly supportive. And when we first started our business, he wanted to be able to show his support. We did a job for him. He was very happy. He gave us a glowing report, probably 2 paragraphs of how wonderful we were, how professional we were, how responsible we were, what a delight it was to work for us. But he forgot to move the stars at the top of that review. So he gave us a 1-star review because he didn't drag it across. He meant to give us a 5. We can't change that review. And we came out at the beginning of our business with a 1-star review. That can be devastating. And we finally had to go and contact him in a kind way, and we had to take a computer with us because we were afraid, as an older guy, he may not get it. And he actually went in and altered his review and gave us 5 stars. Think about how vulnerable you are to people making a bad review. And think of that whenever you give a bad review. Think about the effect you can have. If you're just hacked off at somebody and you go in and give them a poor review, that's just mean. Now, if they deserve it, that's another thing. But if you're acting out of anger. So my point is, you have to manage the risk to your reputation in addition to the risk of your money and the success of your small business. Create ways to mitigate that kind of risk as well. And that might go on your list of possibilities every year. What are you doing to enhance the reputation that you have in the art community and the whatever it is market that you're functioning in? It's really, really important that you have some sort of plan. As I say, you're not going to create a ridiculously large, involved plan like that of a city government or a large organization. That would be foolish. But if you have no plan, then you're really inviting trouble. When I was a teacher, every few months we would have a fire drill. And we learned generally very little from those fire drills. We might have learned that, okay, we need to make sure this door doesn't lock behind us, and that this is how people report back. And so you're learning from those exercises. But the most important reason that we did fire drills with children is because all the studies show that people who have a plan for what to do in an emergency survive much better than those who have no plan. And so just the act of going through it and having that little exercise, we know that we're increasing the likelihood that a child in a fire knows what to do and can get out safely. So having a plan in your business is like doing that fire drill. Even if it's not apparent how it's helping you, having a plan is helping you. And the other thing, I guess, to remember is that we're never free of risk, right? You're not ever going to solve all these problems. You're never going to be in a situation where you are not going to face risks. And I should say, obviously, negative risks, because the opportunity risks, those we want all the time. But don't believe that you're going to get all of this right the first time, or even after a long time. The point is not to solve all the problems. The point is to have a plan and to be able to recognize and react to risk whenever you find it. So anyway, that's what I wanted to share with you guys this week. Please let me know if you like these podcasts and the topics that we discuss. I know that I'm still kind of faltering. We're still only on episode 6, and I feel like I'm stumbling over words and searching for ideas. I will get better. I used to teach, and I have been reminded lately that this is so much like teaching. I used to be able to go into a class with a few notes in my hand and talk for 45 minutes and engage an audience basically for 45 minutes. And I did that several times a day. Now I'm finding it really difficult to do that. So I apologize, and I promise I'll get better. I hope you'll keep watching or listening, depending upon how you're viewing this or listening to it. Please, if you would like and subscribe, that would help me a lot. And if you could give me back some feedback on how I'm doing or different topics that you'd like to that are concerning to you, I'd love to hear that as well. Have a wonderful week. By the way, we're still doing our giveaway. We're giving away a spreadsheet it's a template of a spreadsheet that I use to manage all of my accounts and expenses and income and projects. It's something that I've developed over the years, and I use it every single day. I wish I would have had that when I first started out. It took me several years to build it to where it is now. I'm giving it away if it's of interest to you and can help you in your business. If you've already got an accounting system that works for you, fine. That's great. You want to see what somebody else is doing, that's fine too. Free gift. Use it any way you like. Just drop me your email. You can send me an email with it, or if you just go to johnbishopfineart.com, there's a little tab there that says giveaway. Throw your email in there and I'll send out the file. Happy to do it. Have a wonderful week. Next week, we're going to be talking about the importance of being a cheerleader for your own business. How do you self-motivate? And so hopefully that'll be a fun episode. And have a great week, and I will see you then. Bye.